Friends of peace. Even though our governments keep on claiming otherwise, the war in Ukraine has turned into a proxy war between NATO and Russia. NATO members are party to the war with their supplies of weapons and military aid to Ukraine. And first of foremost, the United States, which supplied 43 billion euros of weapons to Kiev last year, followed by the United Kingdom to the tune of 6.6 billion euros. Germany supplied weapons totaling in 3.5 billion and Poland with 2.4. These four NATO member states alone, together with the European Union, have also provided over 60 billion euros in financial aid to Ukraine. And while people are dying in Ukraine, the arms companies' shareholders are profiting hand over fist. The German arms manufacturer Rheinmetall alone increased its turnover by 20% last year, and its profit margin rose to 11.5%. Meanwhile, the US administration, as well as the governments in the United Kingdom and Germany, are preventing all attempts to achieve a peace negotiation, a diplomatic solution. They are foolishly hoping that Ukraine can achieve a military victory over the nuclear power that is Russia. How insane. And I think this madness must end. We need an immediate ceasefire without preconditions, as well as a diplomatic solution. To escape the logic of warfare in which more and more and increasingly heavy weapons are delivered. At the end of the day, the result will be a fatal all-in strategy that is tantamount to sending in our own troops. And it is our responsibility to stand up to the warmongers and break this escalating spiral. And let's not kid ourselves here. Our governments are the ones who want this war and who want this war to continue. Therefore, it is our duty, it is our politicians that we need to stop. And it is travesty, those very same people who invaded Iraq, who brought about regime change in Libya in breach of the UN Security Council resolution, and who are supplying weapons to Saudi Arabia for the murderous war in Yemen, want to tell us that these weapon deliveries to Ukraine are a question of international law. I think we must not let them get away with this prestigious double standard. Therefore, our primary duty is to ensure that we are not taken in by this kingdom of lies. And that's why it is a disgrace that these people who breach the international law, not in the dock, are not in jail or in a trial, but someone who exposed war crimes like Julian Assange is in 4 years in London. We are not going to be silent still till Julian Assange is in freedom and is with his loving. The Brazilian President Lula has called on the European Union to stop supplying weapons to Ukraine, thus prolonging the war. The United States must, and I quote, stop promoting war and start talking peace, quote, end. This also applies to the European Union, who went on. And I think Lula is more than right. It speaks volumes that the US administration immediately fired back, accusing Lula of Russian and Chinese propaganda. And we are only too familiar with this discourse from our own countries. It's so transparent. Anyone who speaks out against further weapon deliveries and an end to the war is branded a Putinist or declared to be open to cooperation with right-wing parties and groups. Very recently, yesterday, the Washington Post, owned by an oligarch named Jeff Bezos, has really big contracts with the CIA, is now smearing the German anti-war movement and the left to be linked to Russia and to the far right in Germany with zero evidence, and this is nothing else than an information warfare by European Union spy agencies, and we have to stop all this. And friends, this is how the propaganda of war works, risking a third world war against Russia. Our task is not to allow ourselves to be silenced by this propaganda. We showed this with an impressive demonstration attended by 50,000 people in the front of the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin on the 25th of February. We did not allow ourselves to be intimidated, and with the Rise Up for Peace demonstration, we called for an end to the weapon deliveries and to the beginning of talks seeking a ceasefire and a negotiation settlement. Around 800,000 people in Germany have signed our Manifesto for Peace, spearheaded by the popular left-wing politician Sarah Wagenknecht and the women's rights activist Alice Schwarzer. To remain fearless in the face of pathetic arguments and attempts to foment hate or stir up hate, that is the task before us. Rosa Luxemburg once said the following about this, I quote, "The most revolutionary thing one can do is always to proclaim loudly what is happening," quote end. Saying what's happening, however, doesn't only mean calling out Russia's breach of international law in Ukraine. Saying what is happening certainly means calling out the prehistory of this war. And the prehistory includes, on the one hand, the expansion of NATO after the end of Cold War, despite all the promises made right up to Russia's borders, and this history includes the 2014 coup in Kiev, supported by the West. And the stalling tactics, especially on the part of Germany and France, surrounding Ukraine's efforts to torpedo the Minsk agreement in international law. One breach of international law does not justify another, of course, but those who abuse international law merely for worldwide military interventions should not be surprised if they open doors through which others pass. And it is, of course, perfidious of the United States to want to send its allies into the line of fire, as it did with the decision of the delivery of German battle tanks Leopard 2 to Ukraine. Knowing full well what the delivery of German battle tanks against Russia would lead to among the Russian leadership, Washington pushed for these deliveries to be made. And to put German Chancellor Scholz's mind at rest, US battle tanks would also be sent, they said, but they are not due to be available until the end of the year, if at all. So, no, the US, United States, they have no allies. They have only vessels who are thrown under the bus when needed. Just as Tony Blair was rightly branded Bush's poodle during the Iraq War, Chancellor Scholz today is acting like he is Biden's dachshund. And so it comes as no surprise that the German government is not making any progress in getting to the bottom of the terrorist attacks on the Nord Stream pipelines. According to the research by the US Star reporter Seymour Hersh, the US President Biden is responsible for the attacks on Europe's and Germany's infrastructure. And German Chancellor Scholz is helping with the cover-up operation. An independent international commission of inquiry under the auspices of the United Nations is more urgently needed than ever to get to the bottom of the attacks against the Nord Stream pipelines. Dear friends, the struggle against war in Europe must also be a struggle for democratic sovereignty in Europe. Continuing to serve the interests of US corporations puts both the security and prosperity of the populations in Europe at risk. And please, let's not be deceived into thinking that NATO is a club of democracies and devotees of international law. Take Turkey, for example, which has waged wars of aggression against Syria and Iraq, which has imprisoned thousands of members of the opposition, which continues to occupy part of Cyprus in violation of international law, and which is, in spite of all this, a welcome member of this military alliance. No, let's not be fooled here. NATO isn't about defending peace and democracy, or indeed any sort of values. It is simply a belligerent alliance seeking to maintain US hegemony at the expense of the populations of Europe, but above all, also those of the global South. Olivier Bancourt summed up this issue during my visit very lately in Mauritius. He is the president of the Association of Chagos Islanders deported by the United Kingdom at the will of the United States. And he asked me the following question in my meeting with him. He said, why is it that even the cemeteries for the dogs of the United States soldiers are maintained in my home country, but I am not allowed to visit the rotting graves of my ancestors? The deportation of the entire population of the Chagos Islands 50 years ago was an act of eliminatory racism that sought to preempt all calls of decolonization and to create a US military base in the Indian Ocean that would be there until the end of time. It is this world order, my friends, that we must overthrow. And in response to the war in Ukraine, the German Chancellor had a gigantic arms package of 100 billion euro passed in the Bundestag, which was approved by all parties from the far right to the Greens. Actually, the Greens are the new right in Germany. Just one exception, the Left Party. And there's now even talk of spending 300 billion euro package for the German army. Germany is to be transformed into the highest spending military power in Europe against Russia. Scholz has described this unprecedented act in post-war history as a watershed. This is a wake-up call for German militarism, which believes, after 2 lost world wars, it can be victorious this time around because, like a dog at its master's heel, it feels strong because it knows that the US administration has its back. But while the German government is indulging in its bellicose dreams of ruining Russia, which the German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has stated as a declared aim of this war, there is a very different watershed going on around the world. A genuine watershed that we as a peace movement should welcome without any ifs or buts. What we are experiencing as a result of this West self-destructive economic war against Russia is a watershed without parallel. More and more countries are literally taking flight from the dollar in order to protect themselves from similar US warfare in the future. And while NATO and US allies present themselves as an international community, as they did again at the G7 summit in Japan recently, and called for economic war to be stepped up, large part of the international community are in fact not supplying any weapons to Ukraine and are condemning the West's unilateral economic sanctions as a flagrant breach of international law. A resolution to the effects was adopted in the Human Rights Council by 33 votes to 13 votes and was tabled by countries such as China, South Africa, India, Bangladesh, Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Cuba, Benin, Gambia, Malawi, Malaysia, and Vietnam. The fact of the matter is that the moralizing lectures and demands of Western foreign policy are increasingly being perceived in the global South as neo-colonial snobbery and born of double standards. In Goethe's Faust, since I'm German, I have to bring German literature. So in Goethe's Faust, there is Mephistopheles, who always wants to do evil, but in the end, his actions do good. In the original, Goethe writes the following, I'm quoting, "I am a part of that force that always wills the evil and always produces the good." Quote end. Like Mephistopheles, the US administration, through its economic war and the neo-colonial pressure that it brings to bear on the countries of the global South to get involved, is creating the conditions for the breakthrough of a multipolar world order for condemning neo-colonialism and bringing about the end of the world currency, the US dollar, thanks to which Washington has also been able to finance its murderous wars from Vietnam to Iraq to Libya. Therefore, dear friends, let's be grateful to the US administration for this watershed. What we need is an alliance of the anti-war parties and the peace movement in the NATO countries with the emancipation movement in the countries of the global South against the neocolonialism. And as a result of the economic war against Russia, according to IMF forecasts, the GDP in Germany will shrink by minus 0.1% this year. For the United Kingdom, the economy is even expected to shrink by 0.6%, according to IMF. Meanwhile, Russia can hold out hope for growth of plus 0.7%. And the simple truth underlying this economic data is that both the economic war against Russia and the military and financial aid for Ukraine are being paid for with a social war against the NATO countries' own populations. Above all, in France, in the United Kingdom, and Germany. In Germany, we are witnessing the highest real wage losses since 1945. Running at 5%, a new wave of impoverishment is on the horizon. Many people simply can no longer afford the vastly increased prices for food, housing, and energy. More than 2 million people line up every day at the food distribution counters of charity organizations. The proxy war against Russia and the social war against our own population are two sides of the same coin. And that is why we say no to the war, no to the weapon deliveries, and no to the social war against our own people. Instead of fanning the flames of war, we need this money for social security and for a good life for all. This war is, at the end of the day, like Loki said, the war of the rich for their privileges. This war of the rich is not our war. We are committed to an immediate ceasefire and a diplomatic solution without preconditions. The policy of escalation pursued by our governments is irresponsible. This is what we are standing up against. And I'm thanking you for having me and for this event. Thank you very much.